We are fortunate enough to have missionaries who've been all over the world with us today. The men's chorus has been a big part of our church for many years, and this is something that we've been excited about supporting them in. So here we get to experience some of their travels and some of their stories. So let's enjoy.
My name is Leroy Kelm, and I would like to share with you what the Lord has been doing in my life.
My name is John Hathaway, and I'm going to share with you what this trip meant to me as God traveled with me.
My name is Mike Gifuk, and I'm going to share with you what we really experienced over there.
And my name is Chad. We do have a lot of stories. We're going to try to cram in as many as we can.
My name is Gary Parks, and I'm one of the newest members of this church.
Some of you remember that a few weeks ago we had Chuck Neighbors with us, and he shared a theme, and that theme was, we all have a story. And we all have a story today, all 5 or 6 of us. There's 3 that are not up here, and one is Ariana, which has a story, but I don't know if I can get her up here to tell about it. We have Janet that went with us that told me that definitely she's not getting up here to tell her story. And then Brown also went with us. You know, we all have a different story. We all saw the same thing, but we talk about a different aspect of that story. In the 4 Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they told about a story about Jesus. And were they all the same? No, they're all different. And so our stories are going to be different as we talk about it today.
When we first got to Johannesburg, we had a few days where we didn't have any practice going on, so we just kind of hung out there. We got to go over to Soweto and see some sights over there. And then we left for Cape Town. And that was the beginning of a lot of troubles that I feel that Satan was really trying to put a stop to this trip. We had 3 buses. We went and we drove probably halfway there. And then we were stopping for our dinner. Well, just before we stopped, we went through a toll gate, and one of the buses there pulled over to the side. And we in the back bus thought that was kind of strange. So a few of us got out, and they found out that the bus had a problem. Well, we were only a few minutes away from where we were going to stop and eat, so we decided to go on to there and get it checked out by a mechanic there. Well, come to find out that the bus was broken. It wasn't going any further than that place. So we had eaten, and we were just kind of standing around waiting to decide what to do, and then they ordered another bus in. And while we were doing that, we decided to sing a few songs for the people in the restaurant there. We sang, 2, 3 songs? Anyway, while we were singing, and then we had prayer afterwards. Well, in the middle of us, there was a table with 3 gentlemen sitting there. And I noticed as we were singing, a couple of them were singing some of the songs with us. It was really awesome because, these were just total strangers. And then when we stopped to pray, I noticed that they also bowed their heads to pray with us. After we had prayed, one of our guys went over there and apologized to them for interrupting their meal. And the one gentleman said, no, this wasn't anything for you to apologize for. I needed this. Apparently he was having troubles in his life that the music touched his heart, and he really appreciated us being there. And then afterwards, about a week later, I also heard that one of those 3 gentlemen had asked for Bible study. I don't know which one, and I hope somebody's following up on that. So we got the second bus, started down the road, got about maybe 30 miles, and that bus broke down. The first bus, I'll tell you, broke down because of a shock absorber. The air shock had quit working, so it was just floating along. The second bus broke down because of a transmission problem. So what was supposed to have been a 17 or 18-hour bus ride for us through the night turned out for that bus to be about 25 or 26 hours. But we finally got to Cape Town.
I have just a couple things to go through here, so hope nobody's ready to eat. No, I'm kidding. I brought this flag, and I thought I would begin my segment. A story about South Africa would not be a true story if we didn't have this. David Allen pointed out that this is the South Africa flag that Nelson Mandela and his group came up with. The green that starts from a Y and comes together is the coming together of South Africa, is what he explained to us. My segment begins following this. As we left Johannesburg, we had packed all of our stuff and we began our trip. And so I packed my gloves and my cap and my coat and everything down below, thinking, okay, I'm going to be on a bus. Supposed to have heat. Who would think that? Please raise your hands, because I don't want to be the only stupid one. Okay, well, that was not true. It ended up, I'm sitting by Leroy, my seatmate and my roommate, and come to find out that it's colder in the bus than it is outside.
Well.
And so my confession begins. He found a warm spot and didn't tell me about it until we're 3/4 of the way through. And so I'm sitting there freezing. I had a blanket that I had accidentally stolen off of Lufthansa, and I still do not know how it got on the bus with me. But as Leroy left the last time to go get warm, I decided I'm going to put this blanket over my head. And as I began breathing inside this blanket, I began to warm up. But it's at that point that I confess. After everything that the Lord helped me to be able to go on this trip, I'm under this blanket bitching up a storm about how cold it is. Complaining that I'm there. Why did you even bring me here? Because I'm freezing and I don't know how to get warm. And I stopped. And I thought, man, you are one of the children of Israel. You're a bitcher, you're a complainer, and why did you even come then? So I went to Psalms 51 in my mind, and I apologized to God for my complaining. This ended up being the downer of my trip, but ended up being the highlight of my trip, because then the next morning we ended up coming to this, I think it was called the Praal, where you looked out over this valley of the vineyards, and it was absolutely stunning. And that began my trip as we came into Cape Town, and I began to appreciate what the Lord had brought me through. And I really, truly did apologize for my complaining on that trip.
After we got into Cape Town, we practiced for a couple days. And on Friday night, we were going to have a concert on Sabbath afternoon or Sabbath evening. And they said, to get into that concert, you're going to have your ID tag. And that was the one we had with our name on it. And I hadn't been wearing mine, so that night I said, well, I've got to find it. So I reached in my closet where we were staying and opened up my bag, and my jacket wasn't there. Where did my jacket happen to be? I had no clue. So I got to thinking back of what the process was. And when we left Johannesburg, we had a concert at a church in the afternoon, and we didn't have time to change there, and we changed at this truck stop. We all got into this room, and we were all changing clothes, and I put my jacket in my bag, and put it underneath the bus, I thought. Anyway, I didn't have a jacket. I didn't have a name tag. I was nobody. So I went to bed that night and I said, Lord, forgive me for being negligent in leaving my jacket wherever I left it. I don't know. The next morning for breakfast, I announced that I didn't have a jacket. And so nobody knew where the jacket was. Finally, Ron Oliver said, I think I saw a jacket on one of the buses. So as soon as that bus arrived, I went out, and in the luggage rack above the seats, there was a jacket there. I opened it up, and inside, out of my pocket, was a tag, and it had Leroy on it. How that jacket got from that restroom in that truck stop to that bus 3 days later, I will have no clue. But anyway, that was how the Lord helped us through this trip.
I am. The story I get to tell is about a stop we made in a little town called Grahamstown, and the weather started out nice. And when we got there, had eaten and everything, it started pouring. We had this concert that we were going to do. It was set up on top of this hill that overlooked the whole city in this beautiful auditorium where we all we show up for rehearsal, and it was absolutely freezing in there. I mean, the whole trip, I'm the guy that wears shorts. I'm the nursery guy. I'm outside. I'm used to the cold, so I was cold, and I knew if I was cold, kind of like the bus ride, that there was a problem, that people were probably approaching a hypothermic state. We proceeded with our rehearsal, and probably about 20 minutes before we were done, maybe 15 minutes before we were done, the power went out. And we winged it. We finished our rehearsal in the dark. None of us were in our concert attire, with the exception of me, because I changed as soon as I got there. We proceeded up and ate, and 7 o'clock is approaching very fast, and it becomes blaringly obvious that the power is not going to come back on in time for our concert. So one of the things that they taught us on this trip was we need to be flexible, and this was a time where we stepped it up and we were flexible. We went with, by this time I think we were on Plan X, and it was something else. At any rate, I had a flashlight, so we began bringing people into the lobby of this beautiful auditorium. We couldn't walk them all the way down into the auditorium because it was dark. And we had the most amazing concert. It was like God told Satan, hey, you can take and turn the power off, no problem. It was more intimate. We had everybody crowded in on the stairs. Our guys were down at the floor of the lobby singing up to the crowd, and it was amazing. You could feel the spirit there. The sound was incredible. And then just about the time we got towards the end of the concert, it was like Satan gave up. The lights came back on. We did a couple more numbers, and then we broke out in a spontaneous singing of a song after we were all done, heading back to get our gear, and everybody kind of followed us down into the auditorium, and we gave them 3 or 4 more encores. I guess the biggest takeaway for me from this mission was to rethink what's possible.
We ended back up in Johannesburg on a Friday morning. We are sharing with you 2 weeks of experience in about 40 minutes or less. So there's a lot that we cannot share. But anyway, Friday night, they arranged that we would have a communion service in Johannesburg in the little church that we had practiced. Now you need to remember that we went down there to sing with black South Africans that were suppressed by the white people, somewhat like slaves. And they are, since Mandela, they are coming out of that, but they have a lot of memories of that experience in their life. We sang a few songs for our evening worship, and then Gary got up and led us into the beginning of a communion service. Now you got to remember that communion is about forgiveness and about being forgiven. Gary talked about to the South Africans about, he talked about to us first, the white guys. Says, you know, we need to ask forgiveness for what the white people have done to the blacks in South Africa. And then he talked to the black South Africans about, you need to accept that forgiveness. That is part of the process of how we forgive and how we get that away from us and be relieved of that. The plan is that we would, the white guys would take communion with the black South Africans. This was something new to them because they had never had this happen before. I had in mind a gentleman that I wanted to take part with, but before I could ask him, John stole him from me, and I wasn't able to do that. But I was able to take part with a South African that had come to sing. I don't know about his background, his life. But as we were taking part and before I washed his feet, I asked him for forgiveness of what the white people had done to him and to his people. It was probably the most electrifying moment in my life because I don't think he'd had a white person talk to him like that to ask forgiveness. And it took him a few minutes to respond as he processed this through his mind. But at that moment, he realized that there was somebody out there that loved him, that was a different color than he was. That was a neat experience for me. There was more South Africans than there were whites, so I had a privilege of doing that 2 times with another gentleman. But it brought a new light about communion to this kid right here. And it was worth the trip.
They're being really kind. There was actually ice on the windows inside the bus. It wasn't just hypothermic, it was really our lives. There was a lot of things. You've seen pictures of places where we stayed. We stayed for 2 days at one place where the water had gone out. There was, 120 of us all staying in a place that's probably no bigger than this church, and no water. Honestly, it was probably a hard trip. We didn't get a lot of sleep, and we were running around in these buses, which we lovingly called Petri dishes. Somebody would get some disease, and they would pass it to somebody else, and they would pass it to somebody else. But I will tell you, there were so many moments, as Leroy said, that really, we weren't there, by the way, to teach them how to sing. If you've ever heard South Africans sing, we learned a lot. In fact, lovingly, Macaulay, he said, you Americans, you need to get some surgery on your knees and on your hips and have some springs put in there. So literally, we're there, and he's teaching us how to dance. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. That's, and when they started to sing with us, you could just feel the energy. And I began to wonder why we were there until, as Leroy was talking about, you go to communion like that, and you have people who have ancestors who have been killed at the hand of white men. You had black gentlemen that were in the audience who had, in their experience, been abused physically, mentally, emotionally. I mean, the white leadership in South Africa did horrendous things. They would mow people down and then go put sticks and rocks in their hands to make it look like they were going after them, so they would be justified in their atrocities. We went to place after place and listened to that. So for them to even suggest that they would listen to us saying, please forgive, was powerful. One young man, 22 years old, going to, actually to Whitman, I believe it is, and that's him right there. His name was Stephen. On the bus, he kept talking to me. He said, actually, if you were at camp meeting, when Elizabeth Talbot gave her call at the end, anybody was there at camp meeting? When she gave that call for anybody who wanted to love Jesus and serve Jesus and commit their life to Jesus, that young man walked out from the men's chorus and gave his heart to Jesus. I had no idea. You know, it changed my life with how people look at those kinds of events. Because I was sitting on the bus listening to his story, and he said, Gary, I've got a problem. I said, what is it? Let's talk about it. He said, my dad doesn't want me to become a Seventh-day Adventist. He's angry about that. He doesn't want me to do this. What do I do? Because I want to love my God and serve my God, but I also want to be respectful to my father. How do you honor your father and yet love your God? What would you say? So we had a prayer on the bus there, and we started to talk about it, and I said, I guarantee you God's going to do a miracle here. I don't know what it's going to look like. So we started to talk. He had a couple conversations with his father, and he wasn't even coming to the baptism. And after a couple conversations, I guess Stephen's a pretty good talker, his dad told me later. He can argue anybody. He had talked his dad into coming to the baptism. So Sabbath morning, he's supposed to get up around, 6 or 7, maybe 8, and be there at 3 in the afternoon. Well, our baptism had to be before 3 because we were going to a concert. Otherwise, we'd be doing a baptism at 11 o'clock at night if the parents were going to get there. Well, he woke up early. 3 o'clock in the morning, he woke up and said, well, why don't we just go? So at the concert that we did for the church, Lou comes to me and he said, Gary, that's the Father. So we had to walk 30 minutes back to the hotel where we were going to do the baptism. And I got to ask the Father, so what's up with this? And he told me a story of Stephen being this young boy who loved to sing. And he was really smart. And so his father looked around and found the best education in their village you could find. And guess what? Your tithes and offerings have supported a Seventh-day Adventist school in his town. It was the best education around. And so the father said, they love Jesus. It's a great education. Stephen, you need to go there. So Stephen, for his early grades, went to a Seventh-day Adventist education. He paused and he looked at me and he said, this whole thing is my fault. Because I introduced him to it. And he was rather animated about it. So then he told me about how Stephen was really smart, went to secondary school, was really smart, got a scholarship to come over to Whitman. He needed more books and more pencil and paper and money for those kinds of things. So his dad, and this is just in the course of a conversation, his dad said, yeah, I went out and sold a cow, and so I sent him some money. Well, I've never heard of a story. My dad never had to sell a cow to put me into school. He went on to say, he said he was in a men's chorus. And so I envisioned in my head a bunch of drums and a bunch of sort of long-haired guys. And he said, well, no, they're a bunch of guys your age, Dad. And so he started to talk about the men's chorus and how he had become on the trip. And finally he had asked his father, and so he told me, he said, I'm really struggling with this. And by the time we were done walking, I asked him, so why are you so antagonistic about him learning to love Jesus? Because I'm confused, because you're a Christian and you love Jesus. This is what he told me. He looked at me and he said, when he's baptized, I will lose him as my son. And I looked at him and I said, you won't lose him as your son. He wants to be your son for eternity. You're the one responsible for this. By the time we got to the hotel, we got him a change of clothes. He had agreed to go into the water of baptism and be a part of baptizing his son into Jesus Christ in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And I just got to tell you, and he gave his testimony for 15 minutes in front of 200 people. His testimony about Jesus. He was so proud of his son. I got to tell you, when we stepped into that water, it was winter there. They've had snow. They had snow in Johannesburg. They have never had that since the mid-'80s. There is snow there, and this pool has been sitting outside all winter. And this is an inside little miracle for me. I get ice cream headaches. You know what that is? When you get in cold water, you like freeze up and you go, ah. In fact, I have vomited. And so I was looking at that water, knowing full well that I was going to be baptizing Stephen. And I just threw up a prayer to God. And I said, God, this is yours. We want to baptize him. We need to get in that water. But I'm scared to death to get in that water. I mean, I've made a lot of jokes here about the warm water here. It's not a joke. I love warm water. We stepped into the water, and I got to tell you, I don't know if you have that picture, man alive. His dad, his face was, I think there was ice on that pool somewhere. But we got in there, and I never felt a thing except cold. Nothing in my head, nothing. We had an incredible baptism. And at the end we got out and his son grabbed the mic and he said, it's my dad's birthday today, and from now on, my dad and I will have the same birthday. We sang happy birthday to him. I've heard that 2 days later, in talking with the men's chorus, the father has asked for Bible studies. He wants to know about the Seventh-day Adventist Church that will incorporate him and love him. And I guess we didn't go there to teach them to sing. But as one black South African around late 50s stood up at the end, and he was sort of a left-brain guy, so he's not a real, cry at every commercial kind of guy. But tears are coming down his face, and he looks out and he said, I never dreamt that there would be a time in this world's history that I would meet a white Seventh-day Adventist male who I could trust. And because of our journey together, I've had that experience.
After the baptism, we all went up into the dining hall and gave some of the guys there an opportunity to explain or tell us what their experience was through this whole thing in 2 weeks. 2 or 3 of the South Africans got up and said that they went into this experience very apprehensive, but through the 2 weeks that we were there, it absolutely changed their lives, and it changed their perspective on what men can do if they get together for a single purpose, and that is make relationships for God. There's one thing that this 2-week trip that we took got me thinking, and that is it prepared me to go home back to Salem. The cold, the long trips, the 24-hour bus trip, and that wasn't the only one. Not very much sleep, in accommodations that weren't ideal. We were in a hotel that the city had lost a reservoir, so there was no water, only certain times of the day, and you didn't know what time of day that was. And I remember I got up to go to the bathroom at night, and there was hot water, so I took a shower. I told somebody else, and by the time they got there, there was no water. But it did prepare me to go the trip back home, and the trip there and back is not a 2 or 3 hour flight. It's about 24 hours flight time from here to Johannesburg. It depends on which way around the world you want to go. But it did teach me one other thing. It taught me that it wasn't about Leroy. It was about the relationships that we made with the South Africans. It taught me that we got to love one another if we're going to survive. It taught me that there are brothers around the world that love Jesus just as much as I do. And it taught me that relationship and that trip. And a side note to this is that we were scheduled to start with to fly from Johannesburg to Cape Town. And about a week before, they said, no, that's not going to work. How would you feel if you were a white guy and got to fly to Cape Town, and all our South African brothers had to take a 16-hour or 18-hour bus trip through the night in the cold and arrive there, us being fresh and them going through the experience that they had. And we needed to experience that trip with them. And I'm so glad that decision was made. But it prepared me for one thing, that I'm looking forward to going to my heavenly home, because I've made friends with brothers in other parts of the world. And I just pray today that I can make that same friendship with each one of you, because I want you all to be there and experience that trip that we're going to take one of these days, and it's not too far away. So think about what we talked about today. We could hold you here till 3 or 4 o'clock and not be done talking, because of the experiences that each one of us experienced there. We just pray today that you will join us as we endeavor to make our final flight to our heavenly home. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for this special time that we've had today. We thank you for the experiences we've had, and as we shared those, we just pray that our experiences will honor and glorify you through somebody else. This is our story, and we're going to stick with it. And we just pray that the ones that are within my hearing will also share their story. Thank you for being our God. Thank you for loving us, and give us a good week. And we ask in Jesus' name, amen.